Okay, good morning again. And now we're going with our next speaker, who is Luis Espinosa Anke from the University of Wolverhampton, with a presentation entitled Automatic Sentiment Detection in Terry Pratchett's Discworld.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So thank you, all of you, massive audience, for coming. And I'm going to speak about two seemingly unrelated topics. One of them is sentiment analysis. It's a subfield of computational linguistics. And the other one is literature, fantastic literature. And at the end of the presentation, I will probably have combined both approaches in a way that everything is kind of understandable. Let's go ahead and have a look to what the outline is and what we're going to do for the next 20 minutes. So, I'm going to introduce sentiment analysis, assuming a little audience in computational linguistics is going to be very, very brief and shallow. Then I'm going to move and describe again briefly three of the sentiment analysis methods that have been used widely in the community. And this is because these are the methods that I have implemented on the corpus of Terry Pratchett's Discworld. Then I will speak a little bit about Terry Pratchett, why I decided to do this research on this corpus. I will speak about the kind of goldish standard, that's wrong, it should be goldish standard. So basically, which data I use to compare against the results that return the implementation of these three methods, discuss the evaluation, and speak a little bit about conclusions that, can be interesting. So, sentiment analysis is, as I said, a subfield in the broad and multidisciplinary field of computational linguistics. And it's basically the task to automatically identify positive or negative opinions, emotions, and evaluations. It's basically a very good tool for answering questions or for giving you information to make it possible to answer questions like, is it worth buying this product, or is it worth going and watch this movie, or what do people think about my company or my product, or even more frightening, how is the political party I support going to do in the next elections, or how will the stock market behave in the future. So here's an example of how a sentiment analysis engine works. You've got a search engine, you feed it with a keyword of a company or a product, and then it will, like metaphorically speaking, it will listen to Twitter, it will collect all the tweets at a certain time span that have that keyword, and by carrying out sentiment analysis techniques, it should be able to tell you to what extent people are speaking positively or negatively about a certain company or a certain product. So in this case, people were not speaking very well about United Airlines. Another very nice application of sentiment analysis is the fact that it helps us users to refine our searches when we are on Google or when we are on Bing Shopping. And the idea is that because we have sentiment analysis working on these product search engines, we can tell Bing or we can tell Google, okay, now I want you to give me results of a printer, but not only by release date, or not only by name, but only by, okay, I don't want you to show me any printer that has a ease of use rating of less than 3 stars, for example. And this is all computed automatically by sentiment analysis methods. Alright, so we more or less know what sentiment analysis is, and let's start right away with the first method that I have implemented. It's 10 years old already, and still is fairly frequently used in the field because it's very robust, and this is a very good characteristic in terms of computing. It's an unsupervised method for review classification. The name of the paper is thumbs down, thumbs up, thumbs down approach. How to automatically classify product reviews. So the idea is the program goes to a review of a product, in that case was car reviews and movie reviews, and it gave it a score according to a certain criteria. And this criteria were the following. So first it looks for phrases that are likely to express sentiment. This is something that the same author came up a couple of years earlier, and the idea is that, for example, if you look at the first pattern, an adjective followed by a noun or a proper noun, and then the third word being whatever, is a phrase that is likely to express sentiment. Or if you look at number 3, we've got an adjective followed by another adjective and not followed by a noun or a proper noun. If you're unfamiliar with this notation, this comes from the Venn tree-band from the University of Pennsylvania, so if you don't know what these RB, RBR things are, just Google Venn tree-band and you will get the explanation of that. Now, once we have our text and then we've got the list of phrases that are likely to express sentiment, we need to compute a score for each of them so that in the end we can average them and have a score. This is by doing mathematical formula here, which I am not going to explain for 2 reasons. One of them is because it would take too long, and the second because I made a few changes on the formula myself, so it kind of fitted a bit better my purpose. So it would take forever, and I would think it's the main point here. But the idea is that it's called semantic orientation, and the whole thing behind this is that the semantics in computational terms, okay, this is not linguistic, but in computational terms and in corpus linguistics, the idea is that the semantic orientation, meaning the polarity of a word or a phrase, is very much related with the company it has. Yeah, the idea is that the program looks for the phrase on a bigger corpus or in the web and sees how often these phrases occur together with positive and negative words. This is very good because it allows us to create ad hoc or domain-specific sentiment dictionaries, and it's a nice way to handle ambiguity. And I'll say a couple of things about ambiguity in the next slide. Turning reports better accuracy for car reviews than for movie reviews. I don't think I have time to explain why, but if you're curious, at the questions time, we can go back to that. 2 years later, Hu and Liu introduced a paper that was much more simple than the Turing approach, and it was just take 2 sentiment dictionaries, one of them with positive words and one of them with negative words. The whole thing amounted to almost 7,000 words, and the idea was as simple as this. You have your text, you've got your positive and your negative lexicon, and every time you find a word that is in the positive lexicon, add 1. If it's in the negative lexicon, subtract 1, and at the end, well, you've got a score that, of course, is, many people would argue that it's unreliable, but actually actual research shows that vocabulary and lexical-based approaches on big data, on big quantities of text, are fairly robust and reliable. And these are a couple of examples from the first 5 words. This accessible is not a typo, it's actually there. I didn't even know that word existed. And then 2 years ago, one of the great accomplishments in sentiment analysis, which incidentally happens to come from the University of Wolverhampton, is sentence strength. It's a machine learning trained algorithm that has been trained on MySpace comments. And the idea behind this is that it takes into consideration the particularities of short informal text. So misspellings, abbreviations, smiley and sad faces, and I think like 500 different types of emoticons, and what they call sentiment boosters. Like if you have a sentence with 1 exclamation mark, and then you've got the same sentence with 5 or 10 exclamation marks, which is very typical from teenage type of writing, this is going to have an effect on the sentiment score. And by the way, my last slide is about what Terry Pratchett thinks about the use of multiple exclamation marks. I think it's rather funny, so please keep that in mind. And this is the actual output of the program. So if you feed the program, this is from the demo version online, but there's also a Windows desktop application that you can download for free. If you feed hate, I love you, but I hate the current political climate, the program will tell you that that sentence has higher negative strength than positive strength. And the reason for that is nothing else than because of the previous training it has had with these manually labeled MySpace comments. And here's the rationale for why the program believes that this and that are positive and negative. Alright, so these are the three sentiment analysis methods that I have implemented on the Discworld project. This guy is Pratchett, and in case you're wondering, yes, that's a duck he's wearing on his head. The Discworld is a series of fantastic literature, but not as such. So the reason for choosing Pratchett, I think I'm going to give two very good reasons. One of them is because he's very successful, and the fact that he's very successful makes it easy to collect a relatively large amount of data about what people think about his books, how people feel about his books. So that's one reason. But the most important reason is that he was seen as a nerdy or air quote literature author at the beginning, because what he was writing was he was writing books that were basically mocking and making they were a parody of this huge amount of low quality books that were imitating or copying the epic fantasy successful books such as The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. So in the late 70s and the early 80s, there was a huge amount of incredibly bad literature that was all about dragons, elves, and distant worlds. Now what he did, he twisted the thing, and he came up with a totally absurd world, a flat world that is on top of 4 elephants that in turn are on top of a space turtle that is swimming adrift on space. So everything is very absurd, and it was all for the fun. It was all for the sake of the fun. But his last novel was published in 2011, and this author was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2007. There's no research about it, so I can't claim, I'm making this claim without any scientific support, but just because there's no scientific research about it, but there's like a kind of assumed idea that his work has become darker and darker by time going on. And to illustrate that, I'm going to provide you with a couple of quotes from the early novels and a couple of quotes from the late novels to see how different the style is. So here's a quote from The Color of Magic. That was the very first book published in 1982. And Rincewick, who is a failure of a wizard, he never casted a spell, and he's very ironic. And he's talking about Two Flowers, who is the first tourist of the Discworld. And the quote goes like this: "Let's just say that if complete and utter chaos was lightning, he would be the sort to stand on a hilltop in a thunderstorm, wearing wet copper armor and shouting, 'All gods are bastards.'" So yeah, you can see that it's very witty. It's actually good in terms of irony, but it's all about the fun. There's nothing underneath that. Or this other quote from the second book of the Discworld saga, The Light Fantastic, Cohen the Barbarian, who is a clear parody of Conan the Barbarian, is interrogating this poor guy, Rincewick, and he's telling him, "Shut up and tell me what the other idiot is doing." This ish is because Cohen the Barbarian is very old and he has no teeth, and that's another story. So, "Shut up and tell me what the other idiot is doing." And then Rincewick answers, "No, but look, if I've got to shut up, how can I?" And then the knife at his throat became a hot streak of pain, and Rincewick decided to give logicals. Let me just, because I have to rush a little bit, so just one quote from the late novels. So here's the change I was talking about. "She heard him mutter, 'Can you take away this grief?' And this guy is dying, and she's asking a witch if she can take away his grief. And she's answering, 'I'm sorry, but everyone asks me, and I will not do so even if I knew how. It belongs to you. Only time and tears take away grief. That is what they are for.'" So there's a clear evidence shift in terms of darkness. So what I did was, I happened to write a blog about the Discworld, and I have I don't have a lot of readers, but they're very faithful. So yes. So this is interesting because I surveyed them and I asked them to answer a survey rating from 1 to 10 how they felt when they read the Discworld books. 1 being devastated, it was a very dark book, I wanted to kill myself after I finished reading it. And then 10 was, this book was very good, it made me feel very happy and I felt good when I finished reading it. And then the idea was to compare to what extent that this human judgment replicated the scores given by the automatic methods. So everything was implemented in Python, in the Python programming language. I need to say that the way to standardize the data was to subtract the mean and divide by the standard deviation. And these are the histograms for the three comparisons. The human bars will always be the human scores, and the other ones are going to be the automatic methods. So this one is the thumbs up, thumbs down method, and as you can see, there's no correlation at all. So the basic conclusion you can come to is that a phrase-based method does not replicate in any way human judgment in terms of sentiment and how people feel when reading a book. And pretty much the same happens with senti-strength, which makes a lot of sense because senti-strength was trained for short informal text, and these books are figurative language, long text, and again they have a lot of irony, sarcasm, humor, and metaphors in them. But before I finish, let me draw your attention to this segment over here, and this segment here. So there's a clear, very high inverse correlation between the automatic sentiment score and the human score at the beginning and at the middle of the books. But at the end, especially at the 3 last books, the direct correlation between the language used and how people felt about that was very high. Was over 0.60 in Pearson correlation coefficient in terms of linguistics. That's very, very high. Which means, after all this, first, that figurative language needs to be dealt with in a different fashion when performing sentiment analysis. It can be a good starting point, but it cannot be the only tool to analyze figurative language, at least at this stage. But I think the most interesting food for thought that we can get from this presentation is that this Vox Populi idea, it's Vox Populi because nobody has published anything about it, that Pratchett's late novels are darker, is consistent with the fact that the vocabulary he was using was darker, and people were feeling a very dark feeling when they finished reading these books, which didn't happen in the first books because the language he was using was totally unrelated with how people felt. So these conclusions have to be thought about with all the reservations stated before because of the data that can be improvable, because I might have made mistakes when programming the things, but basically it makes sense. So, and I don't want this to be kind of very strong claim. I just think it's nice to think about this method to be helpful to see to what extent there is a correlation between the lexicon and the vocabulary you use as a fiction author and how people feel when they read your books. And these are the references I've used. I nailed the time. And yeah, as promised, this is what Pratchett has to say about the use of multiple exclamation marks. Now, comments, questions, and yeah, that's me. Thank you very much.